Roy D. Nedrow was appointed Director of Naval Criminal Investigative Service on December 28, 1992. Prior to his appointment, he served as the Deputy Assistant Director of the Office of Investigations for the United States Secret Service. Mr. Nedrow was born on October 19, 1942 in Boston, Massachusetts. He attended the University of California at Berkeley, where he earned his bachelor's degree in criminology in 1964. He began his law enforcement career with the Berkely, California Police Department, where he served 6 years, first as a uniformed patrolman and later as a training sergeant detective. In 1970, Mr. Nedrow was appointed as special agent to the United States Secret Service, assigned to the San Francisco field office. Subsequent career assignments including duty in the New York field office, Protective Services Division, Washington, D.C., and the San Francisco field office. After his promotion to Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Washington field office, he supervised forgery investigations and protection operations. He held management positions, including Special Agent in charge of the Secret Service's headquarters at Counterfeit Division, Special Agent in charge of the San Diego field office, and Deputy Assistant Director of Office of Inspections. Concurrent with his promotion to Senior Executive Service, he was assigned as the Principal Deputy Assistant Director of the Office of Investigations, responsible for 1,200 special agents conducting criminal investigations and protective support activities at approximately 100 field locations worldwide and managing a budget of approximately $300 million at the time. Mr. Nedrow has received numerous awards and commendations for his superior performance and management accomplishments, including Department of Treasury certificates of award for sustained superior service and a Department of Navy promotion to Senior Executive Service Level 6 in March of 1995. In 1973, he received the Secretary of Treasury Award for exceptional investigative skills in connection with a long-term undercover sting operation conducted with the New York City Police Department's Major Crimes Unit. I want to welcome Director Nedrow to the program today. Director, I hope you're doing well today.
Doing fine, Lee. Thanks for the call.
So, sir, we talked about we talked before the interview about your past history as in law enforcement, and one of the things I found unique about your service was your time as a Berkeley police officer was one of the most difficult times to be a police officer in the United States in the late 60s. In Berkely, California. I'm sure the protests with the Vietnam War and things like that were something that were interesting to be a police officer during.
Yes, I joined the police department in July of 1964 as a 21-year-old rookie. I had previously, when at Berkeley, I had done internships with a state alcoholic beverage control and had done some light undercover work there. And I'd also worked as the store detective at the student store. So I had a little bit of background, but nothing really prepared me for the city of Berkeley's troubles in the 60s. About the first thing that occurred is in December of 1964, an event occurred called the Free Speech Movement. And this is an incident where some 800 students, following the direction of the singer Joan Baez, went into the administration building, sat down, and refused to leave. And this event became what proved to be the start of everything we know now as the 60s. It was the first major student demonstration, I believe. And for me, because I was a rookie and the police department was well aware that in the next year they're going to have some 800 trials, they selected 2 officers to be the, quote, arresting officers, end quote. So I like to brag that before I had 6 months on the job, I had 400 arrests. And in fact, I did spend the next 18 months going into trials. The interesting part of that is the trial attorney who prosecuted those cases was Ed Meese, who was a senior district attorney in the county of Alameda. He went on to other jobs as the name, as Ronald Reagan's lead advance man in the 1980 campaign, and then finally as Attorney General. But the protests in Berkeley followed an interesting pattern, and they were peaceful. They were sit-downs or blocking of traffic. And then the Vietnam War heated up and the protests got a little bit more violent. And then by 1968 and into 69, we were in full-blown riot mode. We would come to work every day, change into camis, put our flak vests on, hard hats. And I can remember working a squad where I was the gunman. And the gunman in a squad during the Berkeley riots had a 12-gauge shotgun with an attachment so that we could fire tear gas grenades. So we worked the streets night after night after night. I joked that at one point I thought I was immune from CS gas because you can only intake so much of it. But even that, as the crowds and the demonstrators got smaller and smaller, the remaining crews got more and more violent. And this led into the SDS Weather Underground and a little group called the Symbionese Liberation Army.
Wow.
And so at one point, we had the Northern California chapter of the Hells Angels less than a mile away from the Black Panther Party. And the two of them, somewhere in the mix was SLA, the Symbionese Liberation Army, who later went on after I left for Secret Service, are the people who kidnapped Patty Hearst. In 1970, according to the public record, and I have no reason to dispute it, a set of bombers came in and planted a bomb in the Berkeley police parking lot, and happened to pick my privately owned vehicle and blew it city block, maybe 2 city blocks. You know, tires were found on second floor apartments as they went through. And nobody was injured in that blast, but 5 minutes later, after the bomb went off during shift change. And 5 minutes later, all the shift came out to see what the commotion was, and the second bomb went off. We didn't have experience in this. We didn't know to be careful. And 17 officers were hurt. And 3 days before, the same people killed a park station sergeant, San Francisco Police Department, with a bomb that was put into the insert, into a window ledge. So it was quite an experience. But what's interesting for me now, later in my life and career, it seems to go full circle. And we seem to be having the same problems that we had in the middle of the 60s.
Yeah.
But since all of the recruits at the Berkeley Police Department, all the police officers were college graduates, because Berkeley had a college graduate requirement. Berkeley experienced about 25% attrition by 1973. Huge number of officers went out. Many to DEA, some to NIS, and many to Secret Service.
Wow.
So, like I was saying, when I wake up at 3 a.m. with the cold sweats, it has nothing to do with Secret Service time. It was the 5 years with the Berkeley PD.
Wow, what an amazing experience to be involved in something like that at the time. Because I mean, that must have kind of influenced the rest of your career as your career started with Secret Service, because you started in the San Francisco field office. You're just across the bay from Berkeley, right?
That's right. And a couple of years later, I read reports that about the bombing, and there's named suspects, named suspects that the San Francisco Police Department put out. And they identified the people who did the bombing as Bernadette Doran and Bill Ayers. And in a public statement, they accused them of the bombing. And since they didn't have enough information to file criminal cases, the San Francisco Police Department Association of Officers invited Ayers and Doran to sue them for their allegations.
Huh.
Of course, both of them dismissed the news that report that the police association put out.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was kind of a baptism of fire, and I went on to the Secret Service because I was interested in their investigative responsibilities. They were primarily responsible for fiduciary and financial crimes, counterfeiting, forgery, etc., any obligation of the government. The protection of presidents, etc., was an expanding mission that every agent got involved in, and every agent did it, but agents tend to gravitate toward one field or the other. And in my case, I was severely enamored with the investigation of counterfeiting, and did what was required on the protection side of it.
Wow. So we don't, we can go into as much detail about Secret Service as possible, but kind of the progression of your career in Secret Service, going from those levels as being an agent in the field to a manager, and then eventually a senior leader in the organization. Can you talk a little bit about the later aspects just before you came to NIS, as far as the senior leadership and what you were responsible for to kind of set up your selection as director of NCIS?
Yeah, sure. My third transfer to Washington out of 7 transfers during 23 years, I was appointed the Deputy Assistant Director for Inspection. And that is what it sounds like. We were responsible for looking at the health and welfare of the field offices and all the different divisions and units in the Secret Service. And that was an important background because from there I went on to become the Deputy Assistant Director for Investigations. And that was direct responsibility for I think at the time we had a couple of thousand agents in the field. And my part of the pie was all the SIS in the major offices. And with the inspection background, it was helpful in trying to manage the far-reaching investigative responsibilities in connection with the constant protection requirements where agents were pulled off cases and required to go do their protection assignments. When I was responsible for 5 years for the counterfeit program for counterfeit division during a campaign, and the real challenge there was carving out agents so we could consistently do the investigations with the constant requirements of the security apparatus. But so it was quite a juggling act, and that's basically how I got my introduction to dealing with the senior external Washington world. In the summer of 1992, my director in the Secret Service got a call from the Navy, from the Secretary's office, asking if they could send somebody over to have a conversation about NIS and the future of NIS. And all I knew at that point about NIS was what I've been reading in the papers. And all I can say is, no, it was a horrible summer. Just for background, the Clarence Thomas nomination was occurring, and that was all about sexual innuendo and inflammatory allegations. And then on top of that, the NIS tailhook investigation was splashed all over the news. And it was quite front page that NIS had lost the investigation, and they'd taken it away and given it to the Department of Defense, Defense Criminal Investigative Service. So anyhow, all I knew was that some group of people in the Navy wanted to talk about NIS, so I went over to the Pentagon and sat down in a meeting, and the first surprise was that it was chaired by the Secretary himself. And there were a couple of other, there's a 3-star admiral who turned out to be the Navy's Inspector General. And there was a representative from the Department of the DOD who happened to be a NCIS employee. So this, I had no dog in this fight. I had never served in the Navy or any military service. I had my ROTC certificate that said I was eligible to become a corporal if I ever joined the Army. Out of that, I participated in this 2-hour event, and the secretary was Sean O'Keefe at the time. And it was an interesting conversation. It was clear that the issue was, quote, what do we do to fix NIS, end quote. And the first thing I recommended, and I found I had a receptive audience and was probably preaching to the choir, I said, well, you need to put a professional civilian career criminal investigator in charge of the organization. And as it turned out, there was no career path like that in the military. There was no military job description, even close to that. It appeared to me that they would take a military officer of any kind of background and kind of shove him into the director's role, whether or not had any experience at all. And I said, you can never know your clientele or your employees with that kind of background. So that was my number one point. And I said, the second thing, appears to me, you got to do a rehabilitation with the organization. Not that it may need any change, but you need to change the perception, because Congress is acting like its hair is on fire. And I don't know about the Navy's position, but the public is going to believe what has been written in the Washington Post, and you've got to change that. So those were the primary things I came up with. At one point, the secretary said, we're planning to move the fraud mission to the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. And I said, well, how big is that? I mean, what kind of impacts that? And he said, well, I think he said 160 or so agents. And I said, well, if you do that right now, it's going to look like punishment. And I don't see where it serves the Navy. I'm somewhat familiar with inspector generals and their capabilities and their focus. And I'm not sure, I don't know, but I wouldn't think the Navy would want people with conflicting interests and mission concerned about whether or not the parts in an F-15 or 18, whatever you guys fly, are counterfeit. And he was clearly set that the fraud mission was going to have to go. And anyhow, we had a nice talk. I think I got a nice glass of ice water, and I went back to Secret Service and basically forgot about it.
Wow.
But but of course I was interested and I was following the news, and at a certain point that summer, a application came out for an SES position of Director of Secret Service. And that's when I knew I really was preaching to the choir, because they had already decided to go civilian. Also, as I recall from my notes, a whole bunch of Navy admirals got fired over tailhook, and I think the secretary had been replaced by Sean O'Keefe, who I think was a comptroller in the DOD at the time, when he became secretary. And then I read that Congress had eliminated 10,000 civilian positions in the Navy as punishment for, quote, tailhook. And I think that has in fact happened back in July of 1992. So that's the background.
Well, I have to say that when you came over, the challenges that you faced from what you just described, plus the fact that it was Desert Storm had already happened and we were in a downsizing mode in the Department of Navy, that had to be a challenge over the 5 years that you were director as well, because you had to deal with possible rifts in the organizations, or all kinds of things are going on. At the same time, you're trying to, develop a strategy that's going to make NCIS a new, really a different agency than it's ever been.
Right. Well, it was clear that the key mission was to restore Congress, the Navy, the press, the public, and maybe even NIS members' confidence in their ability to do independent investigations. So the first order of business was to take a look and see if they were doing independent investigations. And as an outsider, that's a little tough, but I visited, I think, somewhere between 50 and 60 offices, had town hall meetings, and asked the best questions I could on their process and the standards they were using. And I confirmed my intuition that it was a good outfit doing the right thing, but suffering from basically a lack of representation to tell their story and to be left alone unfettered to do the job. Now, overlaying all of that was a constant toothache of funding. And almost immediately when I came over, there was a drumbeat to put in reduction in forces as the only possible way to meet the budget. And I said, no, we can't do that. We can't reduce forces, because in law enforcement, the 1811 community, if you start reducing forces, we're all competing for the same people. There's not a hair's difference in the quality of an FBI agent from a Secret Service agent, from an NIS agent. And if you start riffing people, we could have problems hiring. It's all we're just not going to do it. And we didn't. As far as I know, in 5 years, we suffered a lack of classes. We're not able to have, I think, but 1 or 2 new classes of agents, but we didn't riff anybody. But that was a constant theme in the background as we're trying to go about restoring confidence in the ability of the agency to do its job. And the first thing I came up with that I thought was absolutely critical was being able to tell our story directly. So we had a small public affairs apparatus in 1992, and we expanded that into a full-blown public affairs apparatus. But previous to doing that, everything NIS did had to go through the Chief of Information, CHINFO, and they like to tailor the story the way they like to tailor the story. I was told by the 2-star admiral in that billet on one occasion where we had a robust conversation over a press release we were gonna give on an undercover operation narcotics in New Orleans. I guess it was a pretty standard operation. Every time there was port Fleet Week down in New Orleans, we'd put out some kind of narcotics operation. The 2-star said, sailors don't use drugs. That's a flat statement. And he says, and if they did, there would be no reason to publicize it. And that to me encapsulated why NIS and then NCIS had to have an ability to directly speak with the press. At the same time, we needed to talk to Congress directly. And we were required at the time to be represented on Congress through the appropriate congressional liaison in the Navy. And what was interesting is when he set up that unit within the public affairs unit, the Navy's congressional representatives welcomed us with open arms. They had so much work on their plate. Whatever NCIS had to say, God bless you, go forward, we support you, what can we do to help you? And it was 100% different than what the public affairs apparatus in the Navy basically wanted us never to go away. And they'd like to issue duct tape on every agent's face so that they didn't talk to anybody. So that was the start of the campaign, I thought, to rehabilitate us, because I didn't think we needed rehabilitation so much as we needed representation. And that was a source of, at least in the dealing with the Chinfo, there was constant pressure, constant tension, and some pretty good humor that came along, but that was our primary mission. Internally, though, I have to say the new NCIS morale was the worst I've ever seen, and that goes back to the 25% attrition rate in Berkeley in the 60s. The morale of the troops was very low, and that served me well with the town meetings, trying to prove to them that we were an independent outfit and we were going to stay independent. And that was that. There was nothing more to be said about it. Now, I tried to do a lot of little things to promote that concept. I used to say at these town meetings, we are criminal investigators who happen to work for the Navy, and our clientele is the Navy. We are not first Navy members who happen to do criminal investigations. It has to be reversed. And anyhow, that was the start of that. And then at every opportunity, I would do something to emphasize both those main themes.
Well, I'll just say, just the poster you have hanging behind you there was something that we had never seen before.
Right.
As you know, there was no promotion of the organization. We were all proud of what we did, but there was no promotion of our organization. Just that poster behind you that was distributed throughout the field offices, and all of us, I think, have one on the wall somewhere, was a just kind of a moment where we're like, okay, we've got somebody up there who really believes in what we're doing and what we're trying to do and what we're trying to get done. And so there's a lot of things during your tenure, like for instance, we were all carrying revolvers back in the day. And of course, you got to tell this story because I think this is a great story. Is one of the things that's on that poster is that 9mm SIG 228 pistol that we all received, and that was a great moment. And with the working agents in the field, that all of a sudden we were modernizing. We're going from typewriters to computers, from revolvers to semi-automatics. So it was a great moment in our time there. So,
well, the weapons became to symbolize the whole issue. I don't believe I went to any town meeting that somebody didn't bring up the gun issue. And the this revolver, which I guess they're still carrying today. The Secret Service had done a 3-year study on it, and rather than take the industry's word for it, our armors went out and put 10,000 rounds for the various test weapons. And it was a painful process. Took almost 3 years before they got the gun. So I was convinced that gun's good enough for them with what I know when it went into it. It'll be the right gun for us. The only problem was the Navy, there was a law that said the Navy cannot purchase firearms manufactured in another country. So, I mean, trying to explain that nuance to a bunch of agents, in a field office. So we worked that angle for, must have been a year. And it turns out the small arms in the entire DOD are handled by the Department of the Army. And I think Rockland or Rockville, Illinois, they've got a huge depot with all the small arms. And after extensive investigation, it turns out the Navy SEALs were carrying the gun. So if the Navy SEALs could carry the gun, why couldn't we? Well, that required us to leap out of the Navy and convince the Army to give us the weapons. So when we finally got it authorized and every signature required was done, our NCIS admin came in and said, well, we're going to get the guns. And I said, well, how are we going to get the guns? Well, they're going to be shipped to us, they're going to, through the normal procurement process. And I said, no. No, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a couple of big trucks. We're going to man them with agents. We're going to drive to Rockford, Illinois. We're going to physically pick up the guns ourselves. And the convoy is going to drive them back to NCIS headquarters and put them in our armory. That's how we're going to get the guns. And that's what we did. And then the rollout process, of course, takes time. But I do have one great story over the guns. I was in Camp Pendleton. I don't know, maybe Brent talked about it. I'm giving my normal speech. And the hand goes up in the crowd, a young female agent. Director, when are we going to get our weapons? And I said, well, we're working on it. And we're trying, we're working real hard. It's a priority. She says, you know what? I'll be a blonde before, and this is a brunette. I'll be a blonde before I see that gun. And the chief of staff, Colonel Lohman, a Marine, I look back at him and he's taking a note. He was always taking notes. Well, I can tell you this, whatever the rollout sequence was, Camp Pendleton got the guns first. And there was a special gun issued to this woman because Lohman made sure to get her name. And when she opened up her gun, there was right on top was Clairol hair coloring. And I expected her to become a blonde upon receipt of this gun. Well, 4 weeks later or whatever it was, I got this huge headshot, 8x10. I still have it around here somewhere. She's got a beautiful blonde wig on, I guess. She's holding the pistol. She says, Director, thanks for the gun. But how a small item can become such a festering problem is it's remarkable, really. The other story I had that is we had set up a meeting with PACCOM in Honolulu, and it had been on the books for months. So myself and Colonel Lohman flew out to Honolulu. And as we rolled, we kept picking up people. Picked up somebody from a command as a JAG lawyer. Then we picked up, of course, the rep from the NCIS office. And by the time we went to this meeting with PACCOM, I probably had 7 of us. There might have been 2 cars. So as I always do, I got there early. We all got there early. We sat down. The appointed time came. I'm still sitting. 15 minutes later, I'm still sitting. And of course, as an undergrad, we gave professors 10 minutes, then we walked. If they didn't show, we were gone. So I had asked the captain, the EA for PAPCOM, I said, we're gonna have to go if the admiral's not available. He says, no, he's on the phone with somebody. I said, okay. So we waited another 10 minutes. Finally, I got up and I told the captain, I said, I don't want to be involved in something so important as he's got to be involved in it. He might be, for all I know, staging a setup to World War III in the Pacific or the North Koreans. I have no idea. So we're out of here. So the 7 of us walked out, and I felt like I was the lead duck with 6 little ducklings who were walking up the hill. And breathlessly, I see a Navy captain running up the hill to get it to us. And it was the PATCOM's EA. Anyhow, we sat down. It was a grip and grin. We had a nice little meeting. It was about the most tense meeting I'd had, by the way. He was a naval aviator, and I think he had some preconceived notions from tailhook about the quality of the new NCIS. But I never know what the problem was. I just know I didn't want to take his time up if it was that important. So as we're walking up the hill, I said to Colonel Lohman, I said, how long do you think it's going to take for this to get back to Washington? He says, oh, it's probably already there. But we were an independent outfit, and we didn't want to interfere with the workings of the Navy if we could avoid it. And so we did.
Yeah, sure.
But there were many opportunities, not as I would classify it as semi-root as that, but there were many opportunities to enforce that opportunity.
Well, I remember one, Mark Kluge shared a story that I thought was pretty interesting. He was the representative to the Navy Inspector General, and got a call from headquarters one day. Director Nedrow on his way over, and so he's like, "Oh my goodness!" So literally, he's in his office. You arrive, he braces up, and you say, "Follow him." Follow me. Go down to the office, go to the IG, and you basically tell him to cease and desist on some kind of investigation he's doing. And then you walk down the street, and you can go back to your office now. And he goes, I have no idea to this day. The Admiral never shared what the case was, but I just know that the director came and says, you're going to stop what you're doing on that right now while we're doing our investigative work. And then that was it.
Yeah, those, my chain of command, we did not report directly to the Uniformed Navy. I had frequent meetings with the CNO, and they were informative meetings. And my first CNO was Admiral Kelso. What a great guy. And we'd exchange information, but he was aware, and I was aware, that I didn't work for him. I reported to the secretary, and I'm assuming it's the same way, functionally through the general counsel's office. And so if there's a complaint, I certainly wouldn't take it to my uplink. I would try to resolve it myself with the Navy. And for the most part, I got to tell you, the Uniformed Navy was excellent to work with. They're great guys. And at the higher ranks, they understood the benefit we were providing them. We were eliminating whatever infection or cancer or problem they had, and we were critical to keeping the Navy healthy. So I've never had what I would consider a serious conflict with the uniform. The civilian Navy, however, they had different priorities. Their priorities, well, I don't know what they were in general, but the general counsel's priorities were keeping a happy face, making sure everything looked good. And for God's sake, don't ever ever show up on the front page of the Washington Post. And sometimes those interests conflicted with good, clean investigations. So we on occasion had some robust conversations. I would say this to any future director of any law enforcement agency: be able to retire the first day you take the job, because that's what it might require you to do in order to keep your problem from. I'm riffing here a little bit on the fact that everybody talked about command influence back at Tailhook. You know, it was the military influence in the investigations. Well, in my old criminology courses, command influence translates to corruption. It's just flat out corruption. And, you know, you can't live with a perception that that's occurring. You just can't. I used to say in these meetings, yes, we work for the Navy, but we also work for the United States Attorney and the prosecutors. So they have got to be forefront in our mind. And they do, in fact, I was going to say trump. They do, in fact, trump the Navy's interest. And we had to state that on several occasions. But I think during my time, I really liked the CNOs and dealing with them. When Admiral Borda committed suicide, it was a terrific blow to us. 1995 or maybe 1994, he put out a communique to all Navy that NCIS was, quote, fixed, end quote. I didn't have anything to do with that. I was surprised, not shocked, but surprised to see it. And I think it set the tone with the uniformed Navy. But the conflicts to come were basically not with them. And in fact, anytime I would see the CNO, that Admiral Borda specifically would say, "Now, Roy, I'd like to ask you a question about ABC, and I want you to know this is not an attempt at command influence."
That's good. Well, you had there were a lot of challenges during your time as director. I remember during that time, there were a lot of questions about death investigations, particularly the suicides. Can you talk about that a little bit from your time when you were having to testify in front of Congress?
Yes. My previous association with death investigations was pretty limited. The first female agent murdered, and the only female agent murdered in Secret Service. I was involved in that investigation, and I had some homicide work with the PD, but limited. Suicides became the issue with suicides became not the investigation, became the survivors. And that was brought home to me dramatically when looking over suicide cases, and the philosophy that the first thing the homicide investigators look at, and my understanding is that it's a homicide, and you've got to prove suicide like you got to prove anything else in a homicide investigation. And with that open mind, I couldn't understand why Congress was upset about it until I talked to a couple of the survivors. And people will never believe that their child, for instance, could commit suicide. And it's a tough road. But yes, we had not a contentious, but OSI and the Army and I were all present at testified before the Senate on suicides. And all three of us did the best we could to say they're independent investigations and the chips fall where they may, as they do in all investigations. But parents and relatives just in some cases could never handle that concept. And I noted in the press not too long ago, I think within the last year, the subject again was before the Navy, before Congress. It's it and sexual assault cases just never go away. And all I can say is you can do your best and try and be compassionate with the parents, but tell them the facts in the softest way you can, and that's the best you can do. But
Well, I'll tell you, I watched those hearings when they were going on. And one thing that struck me was, because I can remember back in the day watching on, one of the news channels, the hearings that you went through, and then listening to the ones this Army general is sitting there trying to defend what the Criminal Investigations Division CID is doing, and then watching our director, Director Lopez, and then the Air Force OSI general, and how they talked about theirs, OSI. The changes that you started in the mid 90s have paid benefits because, I mean, the Army is now has a civilian director, and that civilian director came from NCIS. So there's the things that you started way back in the 90s have continued to be an agent of change today.
quite gratifying to have you say that. The survivors of a suicide don't really care about the technical end of your investigation. They only care to look at it in some cases to poke holes in it if they can, but there's just no good way around it. You've got to show the compassion, but you've also got to defend your troops. Now, a bunch of congressional folks, staffers came over and looked at our suicide cases, and they came out of it saying, well, we think you've done a really great job. Now, I don't know how they know that. I don't know what a congressional staffer has for expertise, but even though that occurred, when the report came out, they criticized me personally because I tried to defend with one parent the efficacy of one of these investigations. And I learned a lesson there. They don't care. What they care about is just the pain they're having and somebody listening to it. And that has to be woven in to conversations with them, I think. But yeah, that was not a good thing. But how do you like, for instance, the Naval Academy to the Navy is sacrosanct, and yet when problems happen at the Naval Academy, they've got to be investigated. They've got to be they've got to be handled appropriately. And I will say, on a couple of occasions between 1992 and 1997, I offered the general counsel, who was my direct upline, a solution to his problem at NCIS if he thought I was the problem. That is, I'd be more than willing to retire immediately. And that offer was, I think, on a couple of occasions, but he never bothered to take me up on it or try to. But yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. I'm not sure how this would have been handled if you had a one-star admiral in the director's role, but we had a case that was not our case. A cadet at the Naval Academy, first year, was involved in a murder in Texas, and whatever vetting process they have, the Academy had not picked up on it. His crime partner was a first-year cadet at the Air Force Academy. So you had two people accused of homicide going to two different military academies. The the civilian authorities made contact with the Naval Academy, and neither they or the Naval Academy thought it appropriate to notify NCIS. And so they were trying to have this nice, quiet investigation without talking to us. And from what I can gather from the literature, that sounds familiar to some of the several problems NCIS had in the past when they did not find out about an investigation in the appropriate time. And then when all the stuff hit the wall, the next thing you know is NCIS gets involved. Well, in this case, the homicide investigators in Texas contacted us directly, finally, because they wanted to know if we could run a polygraph for them. Because the defendants or the suspects in their case were up here at the Naval, one of them was in the Naval Academy. So that's how we found out about the case. Well, you can imagine, I didn't think too much of that. And I had, at the time, the Naval Academy was being run by a 4-star admiral, and being advised by his own JAG. So I had conversations with the JAG, and ultimately that's one I had to take to the CNO. I had difficulty getting the Naval Academy director on the to talk to me. So we had to go to the CNO and on that. But I think that got cleared up because the only time in my entire career with the Navy, I got a call from a 4-star admiral apologizing to me.
That's amazing.
And which I have a feeling is kind of unprecedented. I didn't hear a lot of apologies from anybody in the uniformed Navy the 5 years I was there. But anyhow, it was an interesting experiment going to civilians, and that primarily was the reason I departed when I did. Okay, there had been an election, a new administration was coming in, had come in, excuse me, 97, and I didn't think the Secretary of the Navy would be around a long time. Historically, they're not. I had no idea who the new secretary would be and his position on anything. And I wanted to make sure that the leadership would pass to another civilian. So in my thinking, I had more gravitas with the Navy than I would ever have right then. And so I announced my retirement, and it worked out the way I'd hoped, in that we were able to get involved in the process to select the next director. And we're able to sit in on the panels and make recommendations and everything else. So
Well, obviously that led to a lot of success for for Mr. Brandt, who came in as a director after you. But there's a lot of things during that 5 years that a lot of people don't realize that you did as director of NCIS. And it was our involvement in organizations like ICP, International Chiefs of Police Association, of course, the Women in Federal Law Enforcement, WIFL, which we sponsored a conference one year through you. And so there was a lot of education of other law enforcement agencies out there about us during that time, that I think that you really laid the roots to success that continue today with so many more organizations that our organization has gotten involved with, including Asian police officers, the Black law enforcement officers. So many organizations that really kind of started during your time. So that's a credit to you, sir. And really, we obviously, a lot of people appreciate those things, but I don't think they know the story of how it all came about.
well, I have to tell you, 90% of what I did was based on my training from 23 years in the Secret Service. And that model, I thought that model was working pretty good. And one of the things that we in Secret Service always had to do is beg for assistance and help and liaison, because we'd show up in a foreign city. We got somebody very important coming in a week, and you've got to put together a complete security package by begging everybody for help. There's nothing more interesting to show up in Eugene, Oregon on a Friday, the first day of hunting season, and try to put an advance together by Monday on a candidate, for instance. Because believe me, nobody in law enforcement is at their desk. They're out looking for Bambi or whatever. So we just, I was an outsider, okay? I had no experience in the Navy. And believe me, I used that to the hilt. I could make stupid mistakes in the Pentagon, ask stupid questions, and it was very easy for somebody to write it off as that guy, that outside guy. And I played that at work for a couple of years. And my favorite example is this constant pain of budget. I was going into a meeting with the CNO, and the CNO's got this huge, if you've ever been in the CNO's office, you sit about 30 feet away from him and he's in a desk way at the other end of the room. And the wall is lined with Navy captains. So there's his EAs in there, and there's usually a lawyer or two in there. And I think that's the minimum I ever saw in one of these meetings. So I'm sitting in a couch, a good 30 feet away. This is with Admiral Kelso. And the whole time he's talking to me, I'm talking to him. I'm fidgeting in the couch. I got my hands in the back. I'm going through the cushions. Finally, he couldn't stand it. He says, "Roy, what are you doing?" And I said, Admiral, we're short 6, 7, 8 million bucks on the budget. We're in real trouble. And I know that $8 million of the Navy is just a drop in the bucket. It means nothing. So I'm going through your couch looking for spare change. Well, there's a pregnant pause there, and I saw the faces of all these captains turn white. And Kelso started laughing. He thought that was the best joke he'd heard all day.
That's great.
So we pulled that one off. We got our money too.
That's awesome.
And then I got a call later on from the general counsel saying, "What are you doing soliciting money from Uniform Navy? It doesn't work that way. You've got to go through me." I said, "The last time I went through you on budget, I didn't get any money. So I'm going to the Navy." So,
Man.
The other problem we had was in the fraud mission. As I said, DCIS wanted the agents. I think within 3 or 4 weeks of me reporting for duty, they demanded the names of the 164 whatever agents who were going to be transferred forthwith to DCIS. And they would vet them and throw some back and keep the others, I guess. So Agent Al Moretta, who at the time I think was our inspector, he was assigned to go to all these meetings with DCIS and the DODIG. And I said, "Listen to everything they say, commit to nothing." I said, "This is going to be the ultimate slow roll. We're not going to give them any agents until ordered by the new Secretary of the Navy, because there was no Secretary of the Navy at the time. The CNO, probably for the first time in history, was also the acting Secretary of the Navy, which I don't know how that works, separation of powers. And the CNO wasn't about to do it, so we're going to wait." And that's what we did. Al Moretta went to these meetings every week, probably knowing him, didn't smile very much, and just didn't commit to anything. And finally, it died of its own weight. Later on, when we we had to, and it was appropriate, we worked with DCIS as we worked with the FBI when appropriate. And I can remember out in Los Angeles, the three agencies were serving a search warrant on a major defense contractor. I think it was Northrop Grumman. And the big problem at the time was the FBI was hinting that they were afraid NCIS would leak the information. After all, weren't we the guys who were subject to command influence? And so we absolutely forbid anybody to tell anybody in the Navy about this search warrant until it was served. And the morning it was served in LA, I got in the car and I went over to the Pentagon and I loitered around the appropriate Navy floor. And once the warrant was served, I walked into the CNO's office, uninvited, no appointment. And sure as heck, EA saw me come in. He says, "Director, I understand there's a search warrant being served at Northrop Grumman." So it probably took them about 15 minutes, Northrop Grumman, to call the appropriate authority in the Navy. And I said, "Are you sure?" And he said, "Yes." He says, "There's a search warrant going on there right now. They're searching for whatever in the records." He said, "And I believe NCIS is involved." And I said, "Are you sure?" And he says, "Yes." I said, "Fine." I said, "Then it means it's working." Working the way it's supposed to.
Right.
And if the CNO has any questions on that, I'll be back in my office in about 15 minutes. And I never got a call.
Oh, that is great.
But I knew if I waited for the call, there'd be some panicky EAs. But the big guys, the 4-star guys, they always had their stuff together. But before I end up on this conversation about NCIS, I was thinking about the one thing I was so proud of, and that was the establishment of the cold case squad. And there was no cold case investigations done at the federal level, and only one agency that I know of was working them in 1995. And that was a small unit in the Miami PD, I think, were working cold cases. But DNA had come in on its own. Computer enhancement had come in. And we were doing things forensically, and the community that had never been done before. But there was no organization to deal with the possibilities because the lab people weren't going to be doing stuff unless they were directed to. But we had some initial successes that were just astounding. And the one that I liked the most was an officer off a ship in St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands, had gotten off the ship when it docked, had gone to a payphone, and was calling home when he was set upon by 2 or 3 people in a robbery, and he was shot and killed. And okay, St. Thomas has, as it turns out, a U.S. attorney. It's got a marshal, U.S. Marshal, and I don't think any other federal assets at the time. The FBI covered St. Thomas from Puerto Rico. And I think we had offices in Puerto Rico, but it came to my attention now 2 years later, this case had just kind of disappeared. So I found out about it and I called in the head of our criminal investigations, Jerry Nance, and we had a little meeting on it. And I said, give me the background. We got the background. And I said, well, what's the population of St. Thomas, the Virgin Islands? Turned out about 30,000 people. And I said, this is a bunch of street thugs who just happened on this. They're not brain surgeons. And they're still on the island. We should know who they are. We should be able to find out who they are. I said, who's working the case? Well, the FBI is. I was kind of shocked at that. I said, why is the FBI working it? Well, they're based in Puerto Rico and they send a guy over. And I know who the FBI sends over on cases like that. They send a grade 9 junior agent.
Yep.
And the St. Thomas police at the time had a reputation for being corrupt, some vice problems, gambling problems. And it was presented to me that maybe they didn't want to work the case with this corrupt law enforcement agency. I said, man, that's not how we work. First of all, it's our case. We're gonna go find the guys who did this, and we're gonna set up a team. We set up 3 or 4 people, rented a house on the DI, and set up an operation. First contact was made was with the Virgin Islands Police. They had never seen the federal agent. And when we went there, they said, oh yeah, we've got evidence from the crime scene here. We bagged it up. It's in the evidence locker. Nobody's asked for it or looked at it, and we didn't do much with it. And so we got some evidence sitting in the locker that nobody in law enforcement ever looked at. And you can understand why. And then I heard for the first time, well, you know, this case is the FBI's lead case. And I said, yeah, no, it's not. We're the lead agency. We're gonna pursue this. And if the FBI is interested in what we do about it, well, they'll probably give us a call. And that's how it went. And they identified these guys, they were prosecuted by the probably 2-man office of the US Attorney's Office, and they both got life sentences. And that was the start of the cold case squad. Yep. And the message I had for everybody there was, we don't defer our cases to anybody. Our cases are our cases, and if there's a disagreement on that, well, then we'll sit down and have a chat with that agency about it and see if we can't work it out. But anyhow, I understand from the website that they're up to 61 cold cases solved now. And I don't know what's going on currently, but I hope it's robust.
They've just reinvigorated the program after years. It kind of slowed down during the war, but after the war, a lot of the programs that were established during your tenure have been kind of reinvigorated. So, like for instance, at Camp Pendleton, where I work 1 week a month, the cold case squad down there is really one guy, but he has some really good cases that he's looking into right now. A lot of the cases are based on DNA that didn't have at the time. Right. So there's a lot of stuff that they're still working on. So it's still a great program. Yeah, no, we had a female Navy member in Norfolk raped and murdered, and placed in the back seat of her car. The car was shoved off a pier into the ocean. The case was dead as the victim. They had nothing on it, but because of the technology advances, after this car was in seawater, they were able to pull a palm print off the side of the door, an identifiable palm print, which turned out to be the suspects, and they were able to get DNA, which touch DNA, right? It was touch DNA, right? I don't know. I don't know if where it came from, but it survived an ocean dipping. And I don't know if anybody has heard how we got the DNA from the suspect, but at the time we had 2 forensic psychologists on staff, and one of them was the famous Doc Gellis. And Doc Gellis went through, we had a suspect, former Navy member, now civilian. Doc Gellis went through photos of our female agents and found the one who looked closest to the victim. And we approached her and she agreed to go undercover. And what we did is they, not me, they came up with a scenario that she was a real estate salesman. Her car was parked in front of the suspect's house. The car died. In actuality, there was nothing wrong with the car, and the cover officers were right there. She went in and knocked on the suspect's door
and said her car died and asked if she could use his phone. I went into the house, which I was very nervous about her, losing sight of her under the circumstances. Made the phone call for the tow truck. Said it's gonna be about 40 minutes, so I'll go out and sit in the car. And just like clockwork, he said, no, there's no need for that. You could stay in the house here. Oh, reluctantly, she did. And then so she whipped out her portfolio and started licking envelopes for a mailer. And he says, what are you doing? She says, I've got to get these 25 envelopes out. Sure enough, he offered to help. He's licking envelopes for her. The tow truck magically shows up. She leaves a business card, a phony business card with a guy. Off we go. Well, of course, it was his DNA and it was a match. But to show how well she sold the goods, this guy called her on a undercover line, tried to make contact with her a day later, asking her how the mailing worked out. And she told him it worked out just fine.
That is interesting. Wow. And do you think that he wanted to, because she matched the victim so much that he wanted to have some kind of relationship with her?
Yeah, the doc said he will be in transpire because he has been attracted to somebody who looks like her previously. He's going to be attracted to the agent because she looks not like she looks like the victim. She fits the profile of the type of person he's interested in. He's definitely going to be attracted to her. And he was. And so I hope they still have a forensic psychologist in NCIS, at least one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That program's never going away either. It's another program that was I've utilized a couple of times in my career. So it's a good program, and I'd love to have Doc Gellis come on the program and talk about that case. I think that'd be really good.
He's a good subject for you. And he knows how to string a sentence together too.
Hey, well, Director, I got to tell you, I've taken up a lot of time this morning, so I really appreciate your time and coming on the program and talking about the history during your tenure as director. And boy, it was a great time for the organization, and I really appreciate all you did as a director.
Well, very much for the opportunity to tell my little piece of the story. And good luck with your project. I think it's very interesting.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank Director Nedrow for coming on today's program. Those were the best of times and the worst of times. I remember as a young agent how bad morale had gotten because of things like the Iowa investigation and, of course, the Tailhook investigation. And the aftermath of that, how we all felt the Naval Service didn't have our back. When Roy Nedrow took a meeting with the Secretary of the Navy and a few admirals, it would change his life. He knew that we had good agents. Roy Nedrow was able to help us understand how good we were. He did many significant things while he was director in the short 5 years or so that he was director. Everything from saving our economic crimes directorate or our fraud unit at the time, from absorption by the Defense Criminal Investigative Service to his initiation of the first federal cold case squad that endures today with probably over 61 investigations that have been resolved. Once again, I want to thank Director Nedrow for coming on today's program. If you like today's show, ring the bell, like and subscribe, and leave your comments below. I love interacting with people. So until next time, for NCIS Reports from the Field, this is Lee Clements. Stay safe.